Good evening and welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. We're here with you every Saturday and Sunday night, 9 p.m. to midnight. Thank you for spending your weekends with us. We appreciate it. Remember, if you've missed any one of the shows or any part of the shows, you can always check out our website. There you can actually listen to the podcasts of all the past shows that we've done since August 24th. If you want any of our older archive shows, you can go to darknessradio.com, click on Archive section, and there you'll find links that will take you to all of the past shows from the last 2.5 years. Again, for the newer ones from August 24th on, click on the Darkness Radio link in podcasts, and you'll be able to sign up. You'll also be able to subscribe to the XML feed so that you never miss an episode. It'll always let you know when there's a new episode up of Darkness Radio, so hopefully you'll give us a shout-out on that. Got some other cool things. Quick mention again. Remember that TV psychic and famed medium Lisa Williams is in Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park area this Friday, October 10th at 8 p.m. Tickets are still available. You can go to 888-810-2065. Tell them you heard about this on Darkness Radio and that you want tickets to come see Lisa Williams. Again, 888-810-2065. You can also go to edgelife.net to get information about that upcoming event, edgelife.net. And join Tim, Nicole, and Dave as we're going to go out to the Rosedale AMC theaters this week, and we're going to be going to see the brand new movie. It's a screening, so you get to see it before anybody else, of the movie Quarantine, which is a brand new horror movie that's coming out. Looks like it's going to be spooky as hell. Hopefully you'll come out and join us. If you want to be a part of that, give us a call right now. The movie starts at 7:30. You'll be there about 6:30 to come out and meet us and get seated for the movie. You can give a call and talk to Tim or the lovely Ben. We'll take your information. Each pass is good for 2 people, so you and a loved one can come out and see the movie Quarantine with us. And again, you can do that by calling right now. And finally, again, we're going to be doing the Halloween party at the Palmer House in Sauk Center, Minnesota. Our sponsor and corporate allegiance here to digitaldowsing.com, also known as ghostshop.com, for the best in paranormal investigating gear. They are picking up the tab for the cover charge that night. So you can come on out and party with us. There is a cash bar. There's food to be bought and had there as well. But we're going to have a big costume party. Big Halloween bash out at Sauk Center, Minnesota at the haunted Palmer House. We're also going to auction off 10 spots so that you could join us on a ghost hunt. The money that we raise will actually go to help the veterans home that's being taken care of in Sauk Center. And so be a part of that. Help us out. It'd be great. For more information, go to darknessevents.com. Again, darknessevents.com. You can also join us. We're going to be going out to the UFO Ranch, the Isetti Ranch out in Trout Lake, Washington. If you watched last week's Paranormal State, you got to see me on there with the cast of Paranormal State as we investigated the UFO Ranch and caught some amazing footage out there. So hopefully you'll join us. Real quick, we're going to go to a piece of audio that we got earlier this week. CNN has actually reported on this, and this is what kind of inspired me for this evening's show. As I've mentioned in the past, one of the main things that's kept me going in the field of paranormal is my overwhelming fear of death, not understanding it, fear of what comes next, and that's what drives me to try to get answers. So we wanted to do something about near-death experiences. And Tim, do we have it queued up? We've got some information. Let's go to the CNN report from earlier this week.
Well, they see a bright light or a tunnel or are greeted by the faces of long-deceased relatives. That's how a lot of people have described their near-death experiences, and increasingly scientists are studying the phenomenon even more. Among them, Dr. Sam Parnia at the University of Southampton in London. He joins us from New York. He wrote the book, What Happens When We Die. And Michaela Roser in Los Angeles was left in a coma for 14 days after a serious car accident. She's a near-death survivor. Good to see you both.
Great, thank you, B, for having us.
Well, Michaela, I want to start with you. You were 17 years old. Take me back to that car accident that you were in and what you remember.
I was sleeping during the car accident, so I don't actually remember the accident itself. But we were hit from behind, and I was in a coma, or I was out right away. The first thing that I remember was being put on a life flight. I felt the air and I opened my eyes, and there was a helicopter, and I was on a gurney being put on the helicopter. I thought I was just dreaming, and then I went back to sleep.
And so 14 days when you were in that coma, I was reading that this is what you wrote. I was capable of going out of my body. My spiritual self watched from above as friends and family waited to see if I would make it through. I was at peace, engulfed by the love. Never had I felt so complete or connected to all that is. So you're saying you actually remember your spirit coming out of your body and going from room to room in the hospital and approaching your relatives who were there?
Yes, I had control over outside of my body. I had control of going into my body, coming back out of my body, going into different rooms and seeing what was going on. I overheard a conversation that my parents had with both of my grandmothers in the cafeteria downstairs was when I was upstairs in the ICU unit.
So Dr. Parnia, what does this tell us about life after death? I mean, everybody wants to know, is this it? What happens when I die? Do I just disappear or do I continue?
Well, one of the most interesting aspects you see is that although, say, 50 or 100 years ago, when people died, when their heart stopped, which is how we define death, when people stop breathing, their heart stops and their brain shuts down, there was nothing much that we could do. However, because of progress in science now, we can bring a proportion of people back to life. And what we've come to understand is that death is not a moment, it's really a process that begins with the heart stopping, but it continues over a period of minutes, tens of minutes, maybe even over an hour of time before it becomes unreversible. But in the early phase, we can bring people back to life. And what we've come to understand is that at least 10 to 20% of people who are basically, for all intents and purposes, dead, have some kind of activity of their mind and consciousness. And although a lot of what they describe as a typical near-death experience, it's very subjective. They may describe feeling very peaceful, seeing a tunnel, seeing a bright light, seeing deceased relatives. A proportion of them will come back and tell us amazing details of what was really happening to them down below. So they'll tell us that they were able to watch doctors and nurses working on them, reviving them. And when you talk to doctors and nurses, what they say is astonishingly correct. The only thing that's really amazing about it, though, is that at that time, all our studies show the brain is no longer working and they're essentially going through death. So how can the mind and consciousness be working? And is it simply an illusion? Or is it real? Can people really see what's going on to them? And that's what we're trying to understand through a big multi-center study both in the UK and here in the US.
So you haven't been able to really define it yet. Have you found something in your research, though, that we haven't found before through studies?
But what we have found so far through research, basically, is that people who go through death, for the majority of people, the dying process is a very pleasant experience. Put aside people who've had, let's say, traumatic suicide or something like that. And what they describe is a typical near-death experience where they feel peaceful, see a tunnel, see a light, and maybe even have an instantaneous panoramic review of their lives. But it's very pleasant. But what we have to try to understand, which hasn't yet been verified through big studies, is are the claims that people can see and hear, these so-called out-of-body experiences, are they real or are they simply an illusion? And the way we're trying to test this is that we have hidden images that we've placed in the resuscitation areas in hospitals that are only visible from the ceiling. So if somebody like Michaela comes back and says that they could watch doctors and nurses, we want to know, could they also see those pictures? And if we get 300 people who all come back and they correctly identify those pictures that could only be seen from the ceiling, then that means that this experience must be real. If they don't, then we can conclude that it's probably just an illusion and nothing real.
That was the news story that just appeared on CNN. So I wanted to reach out. I looked up the International Association for Near-Death Studies and was introduced to Dr. Diane Corcoran, and I wanted to bring her on the show. So good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for spending some time with us here. You know, I briefly told you that, and as I've mentioned to the listeners on numerous occasions, you know, my fear of death is what's always kind of kept me involved in trying to understand the paranormal. How did you get involved yourself with the research into near-death experiences?
Well, I got involved really a long time ago, almost 40 years ago. I was a nurse in Vietnam. And, of course, this is before there was any definition of a near-death experience, or
right.
Raymond Moody had not written his book yet. This is in the late 60s. And a patient that I had, a young man, had an amputation and had a severe injury, and he described this experience he had in the fields when he was injured. And, of course, now I know that it was a pretty classic near-death experience, but at the time I had no idea what it was or what was happening, but clearly it was a profound experience to him, and I had never heard anything about it, and so I thought, my God, this really is something very interesting. That was my initial exposure. And then over the next 4 or 5 years, in the mid-70s, actually, my father had one after a heart attack and a resuscitation and told me about it. So at that point, I became very interested and started reading, and Raymond had written his book, and, then it was identified as a near-death experience, and that was my initial exposure to it. And, of course, since then, I have been teaching and talking to mostly healthcare providers. Is my emphasis of trying to help healthcare providers understand the experience so they can be there to support patients.
I'll mention this. It's a story I've never told on air, and I don't talk about really except for to a few of my close friends. And I'd like your take on this. I've heard the story of, you die, you go through this tunnel, and you go to the light where you hear voices, and sometimes family members are there to greet you, and that seems to be the atypical near-death experience, or that or floating above your body. When I was in high school, I was with a friend of mine, and we were driving in his parents' old van, and we were screwing around and got into a car accident, and I wrapped my head really hard against the windshield. I just remember everything went in slow motion. When we were chatting, and all of a sudden I looked up and I saw the back of the truck coming at us as we were approaching it very quickly, and he slammed on the brakes. I remember going forward, lurching forward, and my face smashing into the windshield. And then I remember waking up out of the car, and my head was banging, and I was talking to the attendant, the ambulance attendant was chatting with me. I was like, somebody else was driving the boat there for a little bit, because, apparently I was in mid-conversation with this cat when I came out of whatever fog I was in. But during that point, I remember from the minute of impact, I remember jet black, and I remember hearing voices, just like a cacophony of strange voices. I don't even know. I can't say yelling. I can't see singing, but it was just this weird noise of voices all together. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that has always impacted me, and I've had 2 awake visions since then in my adult life, but the one thing that impacted me was through all this muddled voices, and literally it was just like a horror movie. You just heard, and it was just surrounded me. Out of the darkness, just this booming voice came and said, "No!" And then I woke up, and that's where I was sitting on the curb talking to the guy. And that's what brought me out of it. Now, I don't know, have you had experiences or have you heard stories like that? Was that, in fact, a near-death experience? Was I fighting my way back out? I don't understand. I've never been able to wrap my head around it. I was terrified to talk to my parents because we were teenagers and screwing around, and we shouldn't have been in the accident.
Oh, sure.
I never told my mom about the accident. I think I've told her since. If not, she's listening to the show tonight. Surprise, Mom! That was interesting. The other really weird thing was I had a bandana on my head. I was going through the 80s, thank God, and Bruce Springsteen was my hero, so I had a bandana around my head, and I'd pulled it forward where I had the knot in the front. The technician, the ambulance technician was talking to me. He asked me, why did I have the knot in front? And I said, I don't know. And he said the knot took the major impact, and he said, look what we pulled out of the knot, and it was a big shard of glass. He said, had I not had the knot there, there was probably a good chance the glass would have gone into my head.
Isn't that interesting?
Which is kind of a strange little sidebar story on that. But does that sound like an atypical near-death experience for you?
I think that what we know is that there, Sam mentioned some of them, there are about 15 common characteristics of a near-death experience. And what I tell people is that if you had some kind of serious accident or an illness or an event like a near drowning and then had 1 or 2 characteristics, it certainly could have been a near-death experience. Not everybody has, the tunnel, the light, the relatives. Sometimes people just have a sense of being away.
Right.
And sometimes people hear a voice that says it's not your time, and, feel a sense of being pushed back into their physical body. So it sounds like you certainly had a critical incidence, of which would constitute a clinical crisis, and then you had a sensation of voices and someone saying no. So yours is kind of in that gray area that very much could be one. What I would look for are some of the after effects, because the after effects there is a whole group of people, there are people who have a clinical incidence that could have constituted an environment for an NDE. They don't remember any kind of experience, but their whole life they have had after effects that would demonstrate that they very much could have been.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the after effects in a minute. We have to take our first break. And Joe, we have a caller on hold. Joe wants to talk to us quickly about after or near-death experiences as well, that he wants to bring up some points with you as well, Doc. So if you can hold still with us, we'll be right back.
Sure.
And for those of you, again, that are interested and would like to call and be a part of tonight's show, if you're out of the state of Minnesota, you can call us at 800-270-5560. Again, 800-270-5560. We'll be back with more. You're listening to Darkness Radio. Yeah, sadly, I do fear the Reaper, Tim. There's no way, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I fear the Reaper.
I knew it.
Thanks a lot for bringing that up. Hey, by the way, if you want to join Tim, Nicole, and I this weekend out at the Rosedale AMC Theaters, we're going to go see the movie Quarantine. It's a screening before anybody else gets to see it, so if you're interested in being a part of that with us, you can call in. We have passes. A pass is good for you and a loved one, or somebody you don't even like a whole lot. Just bring them with anyway. They can come out and see the movie.
It fills the seat.
That's right. It's a brand new horror movie. It's coming out this Friday, but we're going to go Thursday night to watch it. You can join us again at Rosedale AMC Theaters, but you got to call in to get the passes. If you want to be a part of tonight's show and talk to us, feel free to give us a call at that number as well. If you are not local and you'd like to call in on our 800 number, we have 800-270-5560. This evening, our guest is Dr. Diane Corcoran. She's retired from 25 years' service as a military nurse. She has served as the president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies and serves currently on the organization's board of directors as secretary and chair of the research committee. Before we went to break, we were talking about my possible near-death, and you said to look for after effects. Let's take real quick. We have a caller on our line, and this is a point that I've heard before, and I'd like your take on this, Doc, if you can deal with this. Joe, we have you on the line. Are you there?
Yep.
Okay, Joe, you've got our ear. What would you like to say?
Well, first I got to remember the question.
Oh, okay. And, yeah, you were talking about you had brought up the endorphin release, right?
I remember. When the brain dies. And as a medical professional, have you heard of this before? When the brain dies, supposedly it releases endorphins, and that's a naturally occurring morphine substance in the brain. And I was wondering if that could account for the illusions or hallucinations or my blood sugar's getting low. Hey, can you comment on that?
Yeah, we'll have her comment for you. Thanks for calling in, Joe.
All right. Sorry about my delivery.
No, not at all. That's good.
All right. Bye.
Diane, what do you think about that? I mean, I've heard that before, that it's the endorphins and the thing, your brain's just kind of chemically treating yourself, so that's why you might be hallucinating.
We've heard a lot of things over the years. I think I've heard everything. They started out with oxygen deprivation and, moved up. And currently some people will say, well, it must be the endorphins. Yes, endorphins are released in the body. They're also released in the body when you're running and when you have other experiences. But that can they account for feeling good? Yes, sometimes. But they hardly would account for a sensation of meeting a deceased grandfather who described, his death and where he lived, and you knew all about it, and no one else in the family knew. I mean, there's no such thing really as universal hallucination. So although there are a lot of things that will account for one aspect maybe of a near-death experience, no one has really been able to demonstrate that they can account for all the different aspects of or characteristics or after effects.
What I'm curious about with this, let me pick your brain on this subject then. And again, I try to play the skeptic on some of the stuff. Even though I've had experiences, I like to kind of play the devil's advocate for my listeners. So we've all, like alien abduction, we've all grown up hearing that what happens is there's bright light, these little grays put us on a table, bright lights, they experiment on us, blah, blah, blah. We hear near-death experiences. There's the dark tunnel with the light at the end. The voice is calling us. Grandma steps through and says, come with us, or it's not your time, those kind of things. Now, as the brain is shutting down, your brain, I'm still guessing, is still trying to process and understand what's going on. Can't it be a precursor? Can it, because we've already predetermined. I don't know anybody. I've never met anybody that doesn't know or hasn't heard of a near-death experience and know what to expect. Can't that planted sensation give people the feel that that's what they experience? I mean, if I go to bed after watching a horror movie, a lot of times I'll have that horror movie character show up in my dream.
Well, it is true now that certainly more people have heard about it. It's been written a lot. Mm-hmm. But for me, the real truth has always been in the children. And we have children who have had near-death experiences. And of course, years ago, there weren't any books. There weren't any magazines, there weren't any articles, and children wouldn't have access to the information to begin with. But I have talked to children who, children just tell you whatever happened to them. I was in an accident. I died. I went to heaven. I talked to my father, or I talked to God, or I talked to my grandfather, and he died in England, and give you details.
Great, okay.
And they just give you whatever happened to them. And so, no, I don't think, it's something has been preset for them. Now, is it possible in this day and age that somebody could embellish a story because they knew more about it? All of this is possible, but from my early work in this to people had never, this young soldier, there was nothing about a near-death experience anywhere. He was simply telling me about this experience he had, and he had no idea what to make of it. And, of course, I have heard that many, many times, and we have had, and even to this day, we just finished a 2-day conference on this. I had people there who were 50 years old, and for the first time told about their near-death experience for exactly the same reason that probably you didn't talk about it. They had it when they were children. They had remembered the details exactly, but they were petrified to tell anybody because they thought that, somebody would laugh at them or think they were crazy, or they just, sometimes it's just so personal that they can't talk about it.
I'm, one of my favorite stories, and I'll share this with you real quickly. A friend of ours who's a psychic medium on the TV show Dead Famous tells a story of this one little boy. He had like a little baby sister that was born, and the kid just had a fascination with this little girl, so much so the parents started to get worried about it, and they kept the little boy away from the little girl quite often. They talked to the doctors. The doctor's like, well, you've got a baby monitor. Turn the baby monitor on. Let your son go and communicate with her. See what's going on. You're right there. You can watch it. So they were watching, I believe, on the monitor and listening through the monitor, and the little boy got up close to the baby and said, tell me what heaven's like. I'm starting to forget.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I always like in that story, too, you're talking about how the children have this view.
Right.
And they have this ability. That's where I buy into it, too, is, okay, yeah, maybe the whole dark tunnel and the light at the end of the tunnel and the voices might be hallucinations, might be part of that mix. But when, like this gal that we had on the news story at the beginning of the show, hovered out of her body, went through different rooms, could hear a conversation with her parents talking to the two different grandmothers about what was going on, knew what the doctors and nurses were doing in the room, which is also a very popular, it's not only near-death, but it's an out-of-body experience.
Right.
Is there a difference, a defined difference between an out-of-body experience and a near-death experience for you?
Absolutely. An out-of-body experience is one aspect of a near-death experience. People can learn to have out-of-body experiences through meditation or spontaneously. So having an out-of-body experience is a phenomena in itself, but it's like one of 15 characteristics of a near-death experience. So they're vastly different. The near-death experience has many, many different components to it.
Well, let's talk before we went to the break. Actually, I guess I'm getting signal we have to take another break here. And then when we do come back, I want to talk about the after effects. And then Richard is on hold. He wants to talk to us about one of his near-death experiences. One of his. I hope there was only one. But we'll talk to him as well. And we'll come back with you if that's okay. We'll take a quick break. You're listening to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show with our guest, Dr. Diane Corcoran. We're talking about near-death experiences, trying to get down to some of the nitty-gritty, some of the answers, and see if we can understand what comes next. Stay with us. You're listening to Darkness Radio. Welcome back to Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. We're talking to Dr. Diane Corcoran. She served as a president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies and serves currently on that organization's board of directors as secretary and chair of the research committee. Dr. Corcoran, why don't you tell people real quick, how can they look up information about your organization and how can they join?
Well, let me just correct you for a minute. I'm currently the president, but I have served as the secretary and the treasurer and AM chair, the research chair, but have been in and out of this organization for a very long time because of my dedication to this topic. The very best, we have lots of information on the web page, and you can look up at iands.org and go through the web page, and there are many experiences there that people have posted. There's information for caretakers, for patients, for children, lots of reading, bibliography, and the video clips, and we have just a multitude of information on the web page, and we have groups all over the country for experiencers who really would like to share and be able to talk to other experiencers. That was one of the wonderful things about our conference that we just finished. We had lots of healthcare providers giving information, but also experiencers who had the opportunity to talk to each other and, talk about some of the challenges of having had one of these experiences.
And you said the website is iands.org?
Yes, uh-huh.
All right, great. We'll check that out. Let's take Richard's call real quick. We don't want to keep him on hold a whole lot longer. Richard, welcome to the Darkness Radio Show. How can I help you out tonight?
Hi. This isn't why I called, but it's just a kind of a sidebar as far as the endorphin thing. I worked in surgery for 25 years, and I talked to, quite a few people over those years that have passed away on the table due to trauma. And, it's not lack of oxygen because they're on the respirator, and there's no brain activity because they're under general anesthesia, and they've had the experience. I knew what went on during the procedure, and I talked to the doctor and tell me. And they're dead. So that kind of settles that argument. The reason I wanted to call is I'm almost 60, and when I was a young man in Vietnam, I was on a recon team, and occasionally you get caught in artillery barrages, and you're in a thick forest, so you're slammed against trees. It's just like somebody just picks you up and throws you against a tree. And the first time this happened, I was slammed against a tree, and I shot out on my body. I left my body going backwards so I could see my body. And I shot out about 20 feet and stayed there, and I thought I was dead. I thought I was killed in the explosion. And then a few seconds later, I shot back into my body, and there was another explosion, and I shot out the other side, going backwards also.
Oh, my.
And each time this happened, I thought I was dead. So it happened probably, 10 or 12 times over the year I was there. And each time I wasn't sure if I was dead or not.
Now, did you have, it sounds like you were having an out-of-body experience. It would actually shake you out of your body. Did you see the white light? Did you hear the voice?
Always explosions.
Okay.
And they're huge explosions. It's not like in the movies. They're gigantic explosions. And you're just, at high velocity, you hit a tree, which is usually like 5 feet from you.
Right.
Because you're in a thick forest. So it kills a lot of people. And so that happened quite a bit then. It hadn't happened before, and it happened. The only time it happened since is when I was 36. I was in a car, and I hit a gravel truck doing like 70. He just pulled out a blind drive, and I smashed into him. And all of a sudden, I was sitting in the passenger seat looking at my body, which was pretty smashed up, obviously. And I thought, well, I guess I'm dead this time for sure. And just as soon as I thought that, I shot back into my body. So it's happened, those are the only times it happened, but it happened quite often. And each time, I wasn't sure if I was dead or not. It seemed like I was dead. I was separated from my body. It's always in trauma,
right.
Hard impacts. And, so I just thought I'd mention that. But it's kind of confusing. One other thing, when I was out of my body, I could see 360 degrees, which was a strange sensation. And I was in no pain. But as soon as I shot back into my body, as I was on a rubber band.
Yeah.
As soon as I shot back into my body, I was in horrible pain.
Pain.
And that's just part of the deal, I think.
And those are a couple of the characteristics of a near-death experience, that once you're outside of your physical body, there's no pain. You can see around everywhere and hear everything. It's kind of unusual and very interesting, and I'd certainly like to talk to you longer about that, to have had such a series of explosions, because ordinarily it is hooked with some kind of trauma, and then you have some of these characteristics, but it sounds like you had very quick experiences and then were pulled back into your physical body very quickly, and that's an interesting aspect of it. But we'd have to talk more about after effects, because it is very confusing. The media actually confuses it quite frequently. We, naturally, as the organization who supports and educate people about near-death experience, we're always looking to see what's on television or documentaries. And one time they said, Larry King's having a show on near-death experiences. So I tune in, and the first person is Jane Seymour, who is an actress, of course, and she describes a classic near-death experience after an illness or an accident. I can't remember right now. And it was a pretty classic near-death experience. But the next three people who were on simply talked about being near death. They didn't have any kind of experience.
Gotcha.
It had nothing to do with what we classify as a near-death experience, which is a phenomena that happens, related to trauma. So the media makes it confusing sometimes, but it does sound like you had very quick, because there's no time or place. It would be hard to say, you could have been in the car 20 minutes, and yet your experience felt like it was a few seconds.
Exactly.
So there's also no time and space dimension while one's having a near-death experience, but it certainly does sound like that you had that phenomena happen.
Richard, why don't we do this? I'll put you on hold, and I'll have Tim take your contact information if you'd like to talk to Dr. Corcoran off-air sometime, and maybe you could share more of your stories with her. And would you like to join us out this week at the Rosedale AMC Theaters to watch the movie Quarantine?
Well, I work a lot. I haven't seen my wife in about a week, so my 2 days off.
You could bring her out. It'll be date night, Richard. All right. Well, I'll put you on hold, and
be alone with her.
I'll put you on hold, and Tim will take your contact information. We'll pass that on to Diane. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for calling in tonight, Richard. And if you would like to call in and be a part of tonight's show as well, you can call in again, or you can call us at our 800 number, 800-270-5560. So let's talk about some of the after effects. What are some of the classic after effects to let you know that you truly had a near-death experience?
A near-death experience. Well, typically people become much more altruistic after this experience. It is a major life change. These people frequently change many things. They change their jobs. They change, their professions, their philosophy. Could be they're more interested in spirituality as opposed to religion sometimes. But some of the medical changes are very interesting. And, of course, we have anecdotal information, and one of these days we will have harder research with this, but they tend to have be more sensitive to detergents, to different kinds of sensitivity, allergic reactions. They either become more sensitive in that they need less or a lot more of medication. Many experiencers will talk about having a baseline temperature that's very low. Instead of 98.6, their temperature may always be about 96.6 or something like that. So there are several things that happened that would be very important for someone to know during anesthesiology experience, having anesthesia for an operation, that they are very sensitive to medication, that they do have allergic issues, and, blood pressure, those kinds of things. So, and less materialistic. It's another thing. They aren't as interested in money. Now, some of these things can sound very nice, but if you, and I have talked to several people like this, if you are married and happen to be on the country club track and have made a lot of money, and you're a banker, and, well, let's not talk about bankers today.
Right.
But let's say that you've been very successful in whatever career you're in and have a near-death experience. And then you're much more interested in the nature, and they don't like violence. They don't like loud noises or bright lights. These tend to affect them. I've been at an outdoor dinner table with three experiencers, and an ambulance came by, and simultaneously all three of them put their hands over their ears because the ambulance noise would hurt their ears. And so that means, for example, like children, you're not likely to get a childhood near-death experiencer that's going to want to play football. They're not going to like the violence. They're not going to like the loud noises and the lights. They might want to do something individually.
Sure.
And it would certainly be helpful if their family understood this.
Well, let's take a. We got to take a quick.
There are lots of things that have to do with after effects that could be difficult for people to get used to if they really didn't understand that this was part of a life change for them.
We have to take our break here, last break of this hour, so bear with us, and we'll be back with more with Dr. Diane Corcoran. You're listening to Darkness Radio. Welcome back to Darkness Radio. I'm Dave Schrader, your host. Mr. Tim Dennis across the board from me is my co-host and producer for this evening. If you have an interest in finding more information, you can go to Dr. Corcoran's site for the International Association of Near-Death Studies. Go to IANDS.org. That's IANDS.org. And here's something interesting, Dr. Corcoran, as you were laying off some of those points, and I only jotted down a few of them, and there was a couple more that I lost sight of. Since then, I've always had a relatively low-grade temperature that's lower than normal. I've had horrible skin sensitivity, where, things just irritate my skin crazy. I have become a lot more spiritual. Loud noises, bright lights absolutely drive me nuts. Crowds, it's like, I always said, I don't believe I'm psychic, but I believe that I might have become empathic in life, because when I'm in a large crowd, it's just like a bombardment of feelings and emotion that I can't put a finger on. But the loud noises, bright lights, that stuff gets to me, large crowds. And there was a couple other points in there. I know you mentioned like materialistic. Unfortunately, I'm still a materialistic pig and love to have my big screen TV and my cool video games. But
you can't have everything.
I know I can't fit it all, right?
Psychic ability. There is a proportion of folks who do go on to have some psychic ability, healing ability, and it is worrisome sometimes because they're frightened. They don't understand it. Of course, it's a wonderful gift that once integrated into their life, many of them have done some wonderful things with, but that also is one of the after effects, the whole sense of possibly having some psychic ability. Another great thing that is kind of a good indicator is a lot of near-death experiencers cannot wear watches. You could buy a watch every day with a brand new battery, and it will just not work. There is something in the electrical charge, and some people, experiencers, have said that, every time they sit down near a computer, it'll, get messed up and have difficulty with it, that they simply can't wear a watch because it just won't work unless it's one of those old-fashioned wind ones. So that's another side effect that you'll frequently hear about.
And if you are interested in partaking in tonight's discussion, and if you have questions for Dr. Corcoran or you'd like to share your own experiences, give us a call. We do still have a few tickets left for the movie Quarantine. You can come with Tim, Nicole, and I this Thursday at the Rosedale AMC Theaters and see the movie Quarantine. Give us a call if you'd like free passes to come see the movie with us. Tonight we're discussing near-death experiences, and just fascinating stuff. Our guest is Dr. Diane Corcoran, and we're discussing the different ways that you can tell, if you've had a near-death experience, what are some of the after effects, and we just went through a listing of some of those after effects. Are you familiar with a term called a walk-in?
Yes, I've certainly heard that. It doesn't really have much to do with the near-death experience, but I'm familiar with the term.
Well, the reason I'm curious, in maybe the version that you're mentioning and I'm mentioning are two different things with walk-ins. One thing that I've heard is some of the people that have had near-death experiences and come back, they seem to be a totally changed person, almost so radically, 180-degree turn. People refer to him as walking like another spirit has taken over, like the heaven can wait kind of scenario.
Well, I think it has more to do with it is such a life-changing experience that it is very true that they become very different people because their priorities, their understanding, and it's very interesting with children because when children have near-death experiences, you send a 5-year-old who was ill or had a injury or something and had a near-death experience, and when they come out of that, because many people will report that while they're in this place, wherever it may be, they have the knowledge of the world at their fingertips. So a child has a near-death experience, and, you know, they may have a limited vocabulary of 200 words, and then they come back, and they have concepts and words and ideas that they never had before, and that really are very surprising to their parents. Most people will say, I knew everything at that time. They don't come back with all that information, but they come back as people with very different ideas, information, interests. Certainly not as a walk-in, but as a person that has really developed many different skills and interests in that short period of time, and intelligence. Certainly that's true with children. We see that quite frequently.
I'm curious, Tim, my co-host, had an experience with his grandfather. Now, I know that you were saying, like, that one show they had Jane Seymour, who had an NDE, a near-death experience, and then they had other people who were just near-death.
Right.
But, Tim, and I'd like you to mention this to Dr. Corcoran on the air here, your story with your grandfather. You've got about 2 minutes left, so mention it real quick, and then we'll have the doctor weigh in on it after the top of the hour. And I'd like your opinion on this, Doc. Does this have something to do with the near-death experience itself? When you with your grandfather saw somebody come into the room and talk, Tim, go ahead and explain a little bit about this at his death.
Mm-hmm. I had a dream where he came to me and we talked
No, you said that when you went to visit him in the hospital, that he had seen a redheaded woman.
Oh, no, that was at home.
Oh, it was at home? Okay, well.
It was at home. He had he was doing things like, and this is common with cancer patients, especially cancer patients who are getting close to passing. He was doing things like going fishing with his brother Jim, who had passed away years and years ago. He was out on the farm with his parents, pulling vegetables and stuff like that. And towards the end of his life, he was laying in bed, and it was the last weekend I had seen him alive, actually. He was laying in bed, and he was looking up at what looked like the ceiling, although I couldn't tell if he was looking out into the other room and smiling at my mom and my sister. And essentially, he had said that he was looking at a woman with black hair, red ruby lips, and kind of alabaster skin, and she was smiling at him. And I said, "Well, Grandpa, is she saying anything to you?" And he was kind of silent for a minute, and then as she was starting to leave, he said, "Yeah," she said, "I'll see you real soon." And he just kind of followed her out of the room. Well, at this point, the dog had walked in, and the dog was looking at the exact same point in the ceiling that my grandfather was looking at. And as she turned and walked out of what would have been the wall, it wasn't even out of the room, both their heads followed at the same time. But I don't know what that would have to do with near-death experience, to be honest.
Well, that was right prior to him dying. I didn't know if people like this that come into this, do you see that they do? You've been in this field, in the medical field. Is this precursors to some of the near-death experiences that you've dealt with where people start seeing this happen?
There is really two things going on there. Patients who are getting close to death have a phenomena called nearing-death awareness.
Okay.
And they talk and...
Well, you know what? The music's kicking in. We have to come back. We'll come back after the top of the hour, and we'll bring you back to answer more of that question and cover it. You guys stay with us. You're listening to Darkness Radio here on 100.3 K-Talk.